Pretty solid confirmation here from the Chinese government that Volkswagen and General Motors, their sales are collapsing in China. Now, obviously the data shows their sales have declined significantly. Over the last few years, GM sales in China have fallen by more than 50%. Volkswagen sales in China have fallen by around 40%. But this year it appears their sales have continued to go down, but possibly at a point where, both of them have to be very, very concerned. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. I'm Sam Evans. You're watching the Electric Viking. It's great to see you. This is really no surprise. China's largest car maker, who is called SAIC, is owned by the Chinese government, will cut thousands of jobs, but not in its EV plants, right? SAIC has the company called MG. MG makes EVs. You don't hear of this happening there, right? You don't hear of this happening at places like BYD. However, amid an intense price war, and of course, after losing a lot of market share to EV brands, particularly BYD, Tesla, Aeon EV brand, also companies like Li Auto, Chinese state-owned manufacturer SAIC Motor, they are making massive job cuts this year because GM, they have a joint venture with General Motors, they have a joint venture with Volkswagen, and the EV unit, well, their EV sales and their internal combustion sales just aren't really selling. The total number accounts for 30% of employees at General Motors and 10% at Volkswagen, and more than 50% at its rising auto EV subsidiary. So General Motors staff, that means General Motors SAIC GM staff, 30% of them are being removed. That's a huge number. We're talking probably tens of thousands of staff. Volkswagen, their sales have declined, but obviously we're not quite as much as GM. But you've still got to be very, very concerned if you're Volkswagen, if you're General Motors, because GM is basically a car company that sells cars in North America and China. That's General Motors, pretty much. Volkswagen, they're a little bit more diversified, but Volkswagen are very dependent on China, more dependent on China than any other place in the world. Mass layoffs by Chinese-owned firms are apparently very rare, but the huge price competition in China in the EV segment and the massive increase in EV sales has meant that if you're not selling EVs, and a lot of them, you're getting left behind. For nearly 2 decades, SAIC, which employs more than 200,000 staff, has been a growing manufacturer in China. It's been a hugely powerful company. It makes sense, right? It's state-sponsored. The government is pouring in billions of dollars. But sales fell by 16% in the first 2 months of this year, from a year earlier. That sounds like, well, not that bad, right? But if you add them up, if you add the declines over the last 4 years, then it becomes really, really bad. According to the report, these layoffs are going to happen this year, and the bulk of the firings will happen via implementing stricter performance standards and offering payouts to lower rated employees who resign. Essentially, they're trying to do this as cheaply as they can. Apparently, SAIC are denying this is the case, but that's what you would do if you're a Chinese state-owned company. You would deny that you're firing people or that anything might not be going well. A Volkswagen spokesperson has declined to comment on the layoffs, but pretty much admitted that, yeah, this is happening. According to the report from Reuters, SAIC has a pressure cooker style rating system for employees from A to D, with employees rated D basically told to quit. C-rated employees are put into uncomfortable positions, forcing them to quit, said the sources. Last year, 10% of SAIC Volkswagen employees received a C or D rating. These ratings apply to white-collar professionals, not factory workers, say sources. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means sales staff. Possibly sales staff have a lot of pressure on them right now. Volkswagen and SAIC, they jointly make the ID.3. They also make Audi EVs together. So this shows you that Audi and Volkswagen, yeah, their sales are just not what they used to be in China. GM, SAIC, they make Chevrolets, Buicks, and Cadillacs. But, in China, The best-selling brand not that long ago was actually Buick. Buick was dominating the car market in China. In fact, Chevrolet and Buick together were just an absolute powerhouse. But people don't really want Buicks anymore. The sales of GM vehicles have just collapsed in China. It's pretty shocking. I've made videos on that in the past. The rate of decline has been incredibly fast. And General Motors don't mention this. It's a big concern for the company. In China, EV sales account for 23% of total car sales. Well, they did last year, by the end of last year. But this year, the combination of NEV sales, so plug-in hybrids and EVs together, now make 49% of all car sales, right? And of those, EVs make up about 60%. So EV sales are coming close, pure EV sales are coming close to 30%, combined with plug-in hybrids, around 50%. And if you don't make good ones, if you're a car manufacturer like GM or Volkswagen, the Chinese public don't really perceive them as being EV manufacturers. Have a look at car sales in China. Top 20 EV models, what were they the last 3 years? Yeah, none of them were General Motors, that's for sure. GM doesn't actually have a top 50 selling EV in China. It shows you that probably only be, I think, maybe 3 years max before General Motors just pulls out of China. I could be wrong, but that's what I think is likely to happen. Either way, we're seeing massive firings in China if you don't perform. But I don't really think this is fair. I mean, if you're working in a plant for Nissan, for Japanese automakers, for legacy automakers, you're making internal combustion vehicles, what are you going to do? There's nothing you can do. If you're trying to sell those vehicles, what are you going to do? You're basically screwed. I mean, you're going to lose your job. Really, my advice to those people would be to say, try to see if you can reskill. Try and see if you can get a bit of training on the side in manufacturing EVs, in working with electric cars, whether it's sales, manufacturing, whatever it may be. Tesla does have a bit of an advantage in China. Of course, it's got a first mover advantage. It's perceived as being an EV brand. And some people say, oh, Tesla EVs are not as good as other manufacturers' EVs. Well, you've got to remember, perception and reality are two different things. You've got to remember that it's worth pointing out reliability and the perception of safety is very, very important. Now, a lot of people think, well, Tesla's EVs, in some ways, they're not as good as some Chinese EVs in some ways. That's not necessarily true because there still is a lot of quality problems with a lot of Chinese EVs. Some of them have some pretty significant issues. So Tesla is perceived as being a safe car to buy with a lot less quality challenges. Now, you might be thinking, oh no, the media tells us that Tesla's EVs are crap. It's not actually factually correct. Tesla's EVs, in fact, have a very high reliability ratio, in particular in places like China. Whereas on the other hand, General Motors internal combustion vehicles, Volkswagen internal combustion vehicles, millions of those have been sold. And so millions of people have realized firsthand that they're actually just not all that good. Thanks for watching.